A Navy SEAL thought his loyal K9 was only getting older, but one day, the dog refused to cross a clinic door. What the vet found on the X-ray was not age, it was an old wound. A wound that should have been written in the military file, but someone erased it. Then the K9 led his handler back to a mission everyone wanted buried. Because sometimes, a dog remembers the truth long after humans are told to forget. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, share your thoughts after the story, and please like and subscribe to help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep creating more powerful stories for you. Caleb Rourke had chosen the cabin because it stood far enough from Coldwater Ridge that nobody came by unless they meant to, and most people had learned not to mean to. The place sat at the edge of a pine forest where the mornings came in blue and cold, where fog gathered low over the dirt road, and the old shed behind the cabin leaned slightly to one side like it had survived too many winters to care about appearances. Caleb liked that about it. Broken things that kept standing did not ask questions. He was a male U.S. Navy SEAL in his early 30s, with an angular, rugged face, a sharp jawline, clean-shaven cheeks, cold blue-gray eyes, and a modern short undercut kept neat out of habit rather than vanity. His disciplined, athletic build still carried the posture of command, even in silence, and he wore the same complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform every day, matching blouse and trousers properly fitted and fully buttoned, plain black belt, plain black combat boots, no helmet, no hat, no sunglasses, no tactical vest, no body armor, no gloves, no headset, no backpack, no weapon, no patches, no extra accessories. People in town thought the uniform meant he could not let go of war. They were partly right. They did not know it was also the only thing he owned that still made sense when he woke from dreams, with his heart pounding and one hand reaching into the dark for the only living thing that had come home with him. Vanta slept beside the bed, never fully asleep, never fully off duty. The Belgian Malinois was a full-grown male K9, 4 or 5 years old, lean and muscular, with a deep fawn to mahogany coat, a distinct black facial mask, upright ears, and intense dark amber eyes that seemed to understand more than any animal should have to understand. He wore a tan tactical K9 vest and a simple working dog collar, and even at rest, his body held the focused obedience of a creature built for purpose. Caleb had trusted many men once. Now he trusted Vanta, the morning check of the tree line, the weight of silence, and little else. For months, Caleb had told himself the changes were small. Vanta hesitated before climbing the porch steps. Vanta no longer leapt onto the worn leather couch beside the stove. Vanta slept on the floor more often, body curled carefully toward the left, and when cold rain pressed against the windows, the dog sometimes rose in the middle of the night and stood facing the direction of town. Caleb would wake instantly, though Vanta made almost no sound. He had learned to wake from breath changes, from the shift of paws on old wood, from the difference between a dog resting and a dog listening to something no human could hear. Each time, Caleb would say, "Easy," in a low voice, and Vanta would look back at him with those amber eyes, not afraid, not confused. Warning, Caleb did not want to name it. Naming things gave them shape, and shaped things could not be ignored. He told himself Vanta was aging out of the work, that the long years of service had left stiffness in the joints, that even the strongest bodies eventually asked for gentleness. But guilt had a way of hiding inside practical explanations. Some mornings, when Vanta rose too slowly, Caleb felt a pressure behind his ribs that had nothing to do with the present. He would see another place, another night, a torn line of radio static, a man calling his name once and then never again. He would put a hand on Vanta's head and remind himself that at least one of them had made it out. Then the thought would turn on him. What if making it out had not meant being safe? The morning everything began. Vanta refused breakfast. He sniffed the metal bowl once, then turned away and walked to the back door. Caleb watched from the kitchen, one hand still around a black mug of coffee gone bitter and cold. Outside, frost silvered the grass around the shed. The old building had been there before Caleb bought the cabin, packed with rusted tools, cracked feed bins, and lumber too warped to use. Vanta stood at the bottom of the porch steps, head low, ears forward, staring at the shed. The dog did not bark. He did not scratch. He did not pace. He simply stood, steady and silent, as if waiting for Caleb to finally understand something that had been waiting longer than either of them knew. Caleb stepped out into the cold. Vanta. The dog's ear twitched, but he did not turn. Caleb felt the old alertness move through him, clean and unwanted. The forest was still. No tire noise, no movement near the road, no human scent strong enough to explain the tension in the animal's body. Yet Vanta's tail remained level, his shoulders locked, his attention fixed somewhere beyond the shed, beyond the trees, toward the town. Then came the sound, not a growl, not a whine. A low, restrained note from deep in the dog's chest, almost like grief trying to become language. Caleb set the mug down on the porch rail. That sound decided it. By 8:30, he had Vanta loaded into the truck and was driving toward Coldwater Ridge Veterinary Clinic with both hands on the wheel and the feeling that he was not taking his dog to an appointment. He was following him to a door neither of them had opened yet. Halfway down the mountain road, Vanta suddenly lifted his head from the back seat and stared at Caleb through the rearview mirror. For 1 second, Caleb did not see a dog with an aching body. He saw Vanta on the night of Night Lantern, standing in red dust and smoke, refusing a command for the first and only time in his life. Caleb had buried that memory so deep he had almost convinced himself it belonged to another man. But Vanta's eyes pulled it back whole. The dog had stopped that night too. He had tried to stop Caleb from moving forward, and Caleb, trained to obey the mission, had pulled him on. Coldwater Ridge Veterinary Clinic looked smaller than Caleb remembered. A low brick building wedged between a closed hardware store and a laundromat with a cracked neon sign. The front windows were fogged from the warm air inside. A crooked painting of a golden retriever hung over the reception desk, and the waiting room smelled of antiseptic, wet fur, nervous animals, old coffee, and the kind of fear people carried when they were waiting to learn whether love would cost more than they could afford. Behind the desk sat Tessa Ward, a medical records technician in her late 20s, petite and sharp-eyed, with a focused oval face, light brown eyes, and a short chestnut brown bob tucked neatly behind one ear. She wore a charcoal gray clinic sweater over a pale blue scrub top, dark navy scrub pants, white sneakers, and a simple black wristwatch. There was nothing dramatic about her, but Caleb noticed the way her eyes moved, first to him, then to Vanta, then to the dog's rear stance, then to the exit path. Observant, careful, not careless enough to be useless. "Mr. Rourke?" she asked, keeping her voice level. Caleb nodded once. Before she could say more, a young male technician came out from the hall with a clipboard and too much speed. He was barely in his 22nd, thin, pale, with sandy hair that looked as if he had run his hand through it every 5 minutes since breakfast. He meant well. That was clear. It also did not matter. "Hey, big guy," he said, reaching down. Vanta's head snapped toward him. The sound that came from the dog was low, structural, a warning built before anger. The technician froze. Someone in the waiting room pulled a carrier closer to their chest. Caleb said, "Station." Vanta sat, but his eyes did not leave the technician's hand. Then Dr. Eliza Monroe entered the room. She was an American female veterinarian in her late 30s, slim but strong in posture, with a pale, composed face, tired, intelligent gray-green eyes, and dark auburn hair tied in a low, practical bun. Subtle, dark circles rested beneath her eyes, not from one bad night, but from years of sleeping lightly. She wore a fitted dark teal veterinary scrub top, matching scrub pants, a white medical coat, simple black clinic shoes, and a small silver name badge, with no jewelry, and no attempt to soften herself for strangers. Caleb noticed her stillness first. Not hesitation, control. She did not approach Vanta directly. She did not smile too wide or speak in that sweet, false tone some people used with animals they did not understand. She lowered herself slowly near the corridor wall, turned her body sideways, dropped her gaze slightly off-center, and let one hand rest open near her knee. Vanta watched her. The room held its breath. Caleb prepared to correct him, to step in, to keep the situation from becoming what everyone feared it could become. But Vanta rose on his own and walked toward her with deliberate care. Not fast, not friendly. Testing. He stopped inches from her hand, scented her wrist, then her sleeve, then the cuff of her coat. His ears shifted. The tension in his shoulders did not disappear, but it changed shape. Eliza said quietly, "Hello, soldier." Caleb's jaw tightened. He's not active anymore. Eliza did not look away from the dog. His body may have retired. His instincts haven't. The first examination happened in silence, more than speech. Eliza did not touch Vanta until he allowed it. She watched the way he sat, the way his left hip lifted slightly instead of settling flat, the way his rear weight shifted to protect something deeper than a simple paw strain. Caleb gave short answers. Limp started 2 weeks ago. No obvious injury. Appetite inconsistent. Sleep restless. No, he did not vocalize pain. No, he had not been in active service since the retirement process after Night Lantern. At that word, Eliza's fingers paused for less than half a second near Vanta's flank. Caleb saw it. She continued as if nothing had happened. But Caleb had lived too long among people who survived by hiding reaction. He knew the difference between ignorance and concealment. "This isn't presenting like a front leg issue," she said. "I want imaging of the hips and lower spine." Caleb's voice came colder than he intended. "You got that from watching him sit? From watching him enter, stand, compensate, refuse full left load, and decide where he could safely place his body." She finally looked at Caleb. Working dogs don't complain the way house pets do. They keep moving until something makes them stop. The sentence landed too close to places Caleb did not let strangers touch. "I want someone senior reviewing this." "You'll have it," she said. "But delaying the imaging won't make him hurt less." As they moved through the hall toward radiology, Vanta passed the first examination room, then the pharmacy cabinet, then the narrow staff corridor without incident. At the second door on the left, he stopped. It was an old storage room with a brass handle dulled by years of use, and a small frosted window filmed with dust. Vanta lowered his head to the crack beneath the door and inhaled sharply. His body changed all at once. Ears forward, spine rigid, tail still. Caleb felt his own pulse slow in response, the old training answering the dog before his mind caught up. "What's in there?" he asked. Tessa, who had followed with the intake file, frowned. "Old supplies mostly. Archived equipment. Some donated items we never processed." Eliza's face had gone very quiet. "Open it," Caleb said. Tessa looked to Eliza, and Eliza nodded once. The door stuck before it gave way. Inside were metal shelves, cardboard boxes, outdated forms, cracked plastic bins, and the dry chemical smell of old antiseptic. Vanta stepped one pace forward, then stopped in front of a gray storage crate marked with faded military shipping labels. Tessa lifted the lid carefully. Inside lay old fabric bands, metal tags, restraint straps, and a small bottle of dry disinfectant. On one tan marking band, half-worn but still visible, was a black insignia, a lantern shape crossed by a narrow blade of light. Eliza's color drained so quickly even Tessa noticed. Caleb stared at the mark, and the air in the room seemed to thin. He had seen that symbol once before, stamped on a briefing folder the morning before his team walked into the operation that would leave most of them dead and send him home with a dog who still woke at night. "Night Lantern," Caleb said, and the name sounded less like memory than a door unlocking. Vanta did not growl now. He stood between Caleb and the crate, facing the same direction as his handler, steady and alert, as if he had been waiting years for the humans in the room to finally notice what he had never forgotten. The storage room stayed silent after Caleb said the words "Night Lantern," but the silence did not feel empty. It felt occupied. The old crate sat open on the floor between metal shelves and yellowed boxes, and the faded insignia on the tan marking band seemed too small to carry the weight it suddenly held. A lantern crossed by a narrow blade of light. Caleb had seen that mark, once on a briefing folder, once on a sealed equipment manifest, once on the shoulder of a contractor who had walked past his team without looking any of them in the eye. He had not seen it since the night his world broke into before and after. "Doctor." Eliza Monroe stood beside the crate with her face composed but pale, her gray-green eyes fixed not on Caleb but on Vanta. The Belgian Malinois remained between them and the box, lean body rigid, deep fawn to mahogany coat catching the weak storage room light, black mask making his amber eyes look even sharper. His tan tactical vest rose and fell with measured breaths. He was not attacking. He was not panicking. He was remembering. Caleb knew that difference because he lived inside it. Tessa Ward held the lid of the crate with both hands, her petite frame stiff beneath her charcoal gray clinic sweater, her short chestnut brown hair tucked behind one ear, as if she had done it automatically to keep herself useful. "This was donated 3 years ago," she said quietly. "A military surplus shipment, I think. Most of it was expired or unusable. We kept the non-medical items because nobody knew what to do with them." Caleb looked at Eliza. "You knew the mark." Eliza closed the crate slowly, not to hide it, but to remove the pressure from Vanta. "I knew a version of it," she said. "That is not an answer." "No," Eliza replied, and her voice did not rise. "It is not." For a moment, Caleb almost pushed. The old instinct told him to pin down the uncertain variable, identify the risk, force clarity before the situation moved. But Vanta shifted his rear weight and made the smallest adjustment through his left hip, and the movement brought Caleb back to the reason they were there. The dog was hurting. Whatever lived inside that symbol would still be there in an hour. Vanta might not have that kind of time to keep pretending pain was obedience. Eliza led them back toward radiology with more care than before. The young technician who had startled Vanta earlier had vanished into another exam room, which was probably best for everyone. Tessa remained near the hall with the intake file and the guarded expression of someone who understood that she had just witnessed a private history break open in a public building. In the imaging room, the air was warmer, filled with the faint electric hum of old equipment and the clean, sharp scent of disinfectant. Vanta hesitated at the table. Caleb placed 2 fingers against the dog's collar and lowered his voice. "Easy, with me." Vanta looked back once. That single glance carried more trust than most men had ever given Caleb. Then the dog stepped forward, careful, controlled, unwilling to show how much each shift of weight cost him. Eliza moved with the patience of someone who had learned that animals in pain did not need comfort performed at them. They needed the world to stop surprising them. She did not grab. She did not force. She guided with small gestures and quiet timing. Caleb watched her hands. There was a fine scar along the side of her thumb and another pale line near her wrist, both old, both practical, the kind of marks left by work that did not forgive carelessness. She noticed him noticing and said nothing. After the first image, she adjusted the angle and asked Vanta to settle on his side. The dog resisted for half a second. Not disobedience, protection. Caleb felt something in his throat tighten. He remembered Vanta sleeping on his right side for months, always the same way, and how he had called it habit. Eliza said, "He has been avoiding pressure on the left for a while." Caleb answered too quickly. 2 weeks. She did not challenge him immediately. That restraint was worse than argument. The images appeared on the review monitor in shades of bone white and deep gray. Eliza stood in front of them without speaking. Tessa, who had returned after setting the crate aside, stopped at the doorway and lowered the file against her chest. Caleb did not know veterinary imaging, not the way Eliza did, but he knew damage when a body showed it plainly enough. The left hip did not sit cleanly. The lower spine carried a compression pattern that made the whole image feel wrong even before anyone named it. Eliza leaned closer, then pulled back. "I want a second read." "From who?" Caleb asked. "Someone who has no reason to agree with me." She made the call from the corner of the room. The man who answered had a dry, gravelly voice and very little patience for ceremony. His name was Dr. Malcolm Greer, an elderly American male veterinary orthopedic specialist, around 62 years old, tall though slightly stooped now, with a deeply lined, thoughtful face, sharp pale blue eyes behind thin rectangular reading glasses, short silver-gray hair, and a neatly trimmed gray beard. He had retired from formal practice, but not from telling people when they were wrong. Eliza sent him the images. They waited 6 minutes. Caleb counted every one of them. Vanta stood beside him, pressed close to his leg but not leaning fully, because leaning would mean admitting the side hurt. When the phone rang, Eliza put it on speaker only after asking Caleb with a look. Greer did not soften anything. "That is not a 2-week problem," he said. "Old hip trauma, lower spinal compression, compensatory loading pattern. I would need the full series for dating." But anyone calling that clean in a retirement assessment either did not image properly or did not report what they saw. Caleb stared at the screen. How old? Greer exhaled. Longer than months. Possibly over a year. Maybe tied to the service period, depending on history. The room narrowed around Caleb until all he could hear was Vanta breathing. Vanta suddenly lifted his head and looked not at the monitor, not at Eliza, but at Caleb's left hand. Caleb looked down and realized his fingers had closed into a fist so tight the knuckles had gone white. The dog stepped forward, slow and aching, and pressed his muzzle into that fist until Caleb opened it. No command, no signal. Just a wounded animal, reminding a wounded man not to disappear into the part of himself that still wanted to fight every truth with silence. For one impossible second, Caleb felt as if Vanta was not asking for protection. He was offering it. Caleb opened the folder he had brought from home because Eliza asked for any prior medical records. The retirement packet was creased at the edges, kept in a locked drawer for years, and almost never touched. It said Vanta had passed final evaluation. No significant mobility impairment, no structural defect requiring intervention, cleared for handler adoption. The words looked official enough to be holy and cold enough to be cruel. Eliza read them once, then again, her mouth flattening in a way that told Caleb she had seen this kind of clean language used to cover dirty things before. If these images existed then, she said, this clearance should not read like this. Caleb heard himself ask, could they have missed it? Eliza did not answer quickly, and he hated her for the mercy of that pause. A rushed exam could miss subtle pain, she said. This is not subtle on imaging, not to someone looking. Caleb looked at Vanta. The dog's ears were forward, his posture steady, his amber eyes calm with the terrible innocence of an animal who had never once accused him. That made it worse. He slept on the floor, Caleb said, more to himself than to anyone. I thought he preferred it after deployment, Eliza's voice softened by a fraction. Working dogs mask pain harder around their handler, especially dogs bonded this tightly. Sometimes they keep functioning because they believe their person still needs them to. Caleb had been shot at, buried under debris, dragged through the kind of nights men came home from only in pieces, and none of it had prepared him for the simple possibility that Vanta had been hurting every day and had stayed quiet for him. A commotion stirred at the front of the clinic before Caleb could answer. A man's voice, low and familiar, carried down the hall. I got a call about a military dog incident. Please tell me nobody tried to pet him like a golden retriever. Deputy Aaron Vale stepped into the radiology doorway a moment later. He was an American male deputy sheriff in his mid-40s, medium tall with a sturdy build, a square weathered face, short dark brown hair graying at the temples, calm hazel eyes, and light stubble that made him look more tired than careless. He wore a dark brown winter deputy sheriff jacket with a small badge, a tan uniform shirt, dark brown uniform trousers, a black duty belt, black winter boots, and a simple black knit beanie pushed back from his forehead. Aaron had the steady manner of a man who had spent years calming drunk fathers, lost hikers, frightened children, and neighbors who thought the worst thing in the world was happening because, for them, it was. His eyes landed on Caleb first. The recognition came with a quiet weight. Rourke. Caleb nodded once. Vale. There had been a time when Aaron called him Cal, and Caleb called him AV. Back before war turned nicknames into artifacts. Aaron looked at Vanta, then at the monitor, then at Eliza. This about the report from the waiting room? No one was hurt, Eliza said. Good, Aaron replied, because half this town is one rumor away from calling a snowplow a federal convoy. His attempt at lightness faded when he saw Caleb's expression. What happened? Caleb handed him the retirement clearance. Aaron read slowly, not because he was slow, but because he understood documents could be weapons if read too quickly. Eliza explained only the medical facts: old injury, improper clearance, need for pain management, and further evaluation. She did not mention the crate, not yet, and Caleb noticed that too. Aaron listened without interrupting. When Eliza finished, he looked at Caleb with something like concern restrained by respect. You think this connects to your last deployment? Caleb's face closed. I did not say that. You did not have to. Aaron glanced toward the hall, then lowered his voice. "You are not the first former handler to come through this county in the last year." Tessa, still near the door, looked up sharply. Aaron continued. "Two men with retired working dogs stayed at the old motel in August. One sold a cabin near the ridge after less than a month. Another came into town asking about a veterinary records transfer and left before anyone could call him back." "Could be nothing." He held Caleb's gaze. "But things that are nothing usually do not make people pack overnight." Eliza went very still at that. Caleb turned toward her. "You know why." Eliza looked down at the file in her hand. "I know there were cases," she said. "Dogs cleared on paper whose bodies told a different story." Aaron's expression sharpened. "Military, contracted recovery and assessment programs," Eliza said. "After certain operations." "Night lantern," Caleb said. This time, Eliza did not deny it. The words seemed to move through the room like cold air under a door. Eliza prepared the first pain management dose only after explaining the plan. Enough relief to help Vanta rest, no heavy sedation, no rushing into anything procedural until they had blood work and a full orthopedic consult. Caleb appreciated the precision even while some part of him resented needing it. Vanta accepted the injection with his usual stoic discipline, standing still while Caleb held the collar, and Eliza spoke in that low, measured tone. Afterward, the dog exhaled through his nose and leaned, just slightly, against Caleb's knee. It was the smallest surrender. It nearly broke him. Aaron stepped back into the hall to take a call from dispatch. Tessa left to copy the imaging files and scan the retirement packet into the clinic's secure system. For a few minutes, only Caleb, Eliza, and Vanta remained. "Tell me what you know," Caleb said. Eliza capped the syringe and placed it in the disposal container. "I know enough to be careful." Careful got him cleared with a broken body. Her eyes flashed then, not anger at him exactly, but pain finding a hard edge. "Careless did that. Careful is why I am still standing here." Caleb heard the history underneath and did not push for one breath. Then the phone at the nursing station rang. Tessa answered. At first, her voice was normal, professional, almost relieved to have a routine task. "Coldwater Ridge Veterinary Clinic. This is Tessa." A pause. Then the air changed. Caleb saw it before he heard it. Tessa's shoulders drew in. Her eyes lifted toward the radiology room. "One moment," she said carefully. "Let me see if she is available." Eliza's face went unreadable. Tessa appeared in the doorway, holding the phone against her chest as if distance from it might matter. "Dr. Monroe," she said, "there is a man asking for you." Eliza did not move. "Name?" Tessa swallowed. "He did not give one. He said to tell you that you are reviewing things that do not belong in a small-town clinic." Caleb felt the old alertness return, clean and dangerous. Vanta, though the medication had begun to soften his stance, lifted his head and stared at the phone. Tessa's voice dropped. "He also said to let Rourke's dog grow old in peace." For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Vanta growled, not at Tessa, not at the room, but at the voice that had already vanished into the line. Eliza reached for the phone with a hand steady enough to prove she had practiced being afraid in private. Caleb watched her, and he knew with absolute certainty that Vanta's wound was no longer the only thing in the building that had been hidden too long. The phone line had already gone dead, but the voice stayed in the clinic like a smell no one could wash out. Tessa stood in the radiology doorway, with the receiver still in her hand, her light brown eyes fixed on Dr. Eliza Monroe, as if she were waiting for the older woman to tell her this was a mistake, a prank, a wrong number, anything ordinary enough to fit inside the walls of Coldwater Ridge Veterinary Clinic. Eliza did not give her that comfort. She took the phone from Tessa gently, placed it back into the cradle, and stared at it for a moment, as if the plastic itself had become evidence. Caleb Rourke stood beside Vanta with one hand on the Belgian Malinois collar, feeling the low vibration still running through the dog's chest. Vanta's medication had begun to soften the edges of his pain, but it had not softened his instincts. His upright ears remained locked toward the nursing station, his dark amber eyes hard under the black mask of his face, his deep fawn to mahogany body steady despite the old injury that should have made him rest. "You know who that was," Caleb said. It was not a question. Eliza looked at him, and for the first time since he had walked through the clinic doors, She seemed less like a doctor managing a difficult case, and more like a woman standing at the edge of a hole she had spent years covering with work. "I know what kind of person makes that kind of call," she said. "That is not the same as knowing the name." Deputy Aaron Vale returned from the hall, his weathered square face tense beneath the black knit beanie pushed back on his head. He had heard enough from Tessa's expression to understand the day had shifted again. "If someone is threatening a medical clinic, I need a report," Aaron said. "He did not threaten," Eliza replied. "He warned." Aaron's hazel eyes moved from her to Caleb. "People who warn like that usually expect fear to do the work for them." Caleb looked down at Vanta. The dog had stopped growling now, but his body remained pointed toward the phone. "Fear is not what he got," Caleb said. Aaron insisted on writing down the call details before anyone left. Time, exact wording, caller ID blocked, male voice, calm tone, reference to Caleb and Vanta by implication, reference to Eliza reviewing things that did not belong in a small-town clinic. Tessa helped because that was what Tessa did when something frightened her. She turned it into a record. Her hands were steady at the keyboard, but her mouth had gone pale. Eliza gave Vanta an initial pain plan and strict movement instructions. No stairs if avoidable, no running, no jumping. Return for blood work and full imaging review. Caleb listened, but part of him remained in the storage room with the faded night lantern insignia, and another part of him stood years back in dust and smoke with Vanta refusing to move forward. When Aaron finished the report, he closed his notebook and said, "There is someone you need to see." Caleb did not like the way he said it. No. Aaron did not blink. "You do not even know who I mean." "I know that tone." Aaron stepped closer, lowering his voice so Tessa and Eliza would not be pulled into something that belonged to older pain. "Nora Pike still lives by the lake." Caleb's jaw tightened so sharply, it changed his whole face. Nora's name was not just a name. It was a door he had avoided for years. Nora was the widow of Jonah Pike, the man who had been on Caleb's left during Night Lantern. The man whose last broken radio call had carried Caleb's name through static before the world split open. "She has nothing to do with this," Caleb said. Aaron's expression did not harden, but it grew heavier. "Jonah kept notes. You know he did. He wrote everything down. Weather, gear, dog behavior, chain of command, every strange thing he noticed. If there was something wrong before that mission, he may have seen it. And you think I can walk onto her porch after all this time and ask her for a dead man's notebook?" "No," Aaron said quietly. "I think you can walk onto her porch and finally stop making her carry your silence too." Vanta, who had been standing still between them, suddenly turned away from the clinic exit and walked back toward the hall that led to the storage room. Caleb started to correct him, but the dog stopped halfway, looked back, then lowered his nose to the floor and followed an invisible line past the old crate, past the imaging room, and back to Caleb's boots. He pressed his muzzle once against Caleb's left knee, the side Jonah had stood on in every old team photograph. Aaron saw it. Eliza saw it. No one said the word miracle. No one needed to. Some animals did not understand the dead, but they understood absence, and Vanta had just chosen the direction of a man who never came home. Nora Pike lived in a weathered cedar house beside the North Lake, where the wind crossed the frozen water with nothing to slow it down. The drive there took 20 minutes and felt longer because Caleb did not speak. Aaron followed in his cruiser, not because Caleb needed supervision, but because Nora deserved the courtesy of not having the past arrive at her door alone. Vanta lay in the back seat, head up despite the medication, watching the passing trees through the window. Every few miles, Caleb glanced at him in the mirror and saw not weakness, but endurance. That made the guilt worse. Nora's house appeared at the end of a narrow lane lined with bare birch trees. The porch light was on, though it was still afternoon, a small golden square against the gray. Nora opened the door before Caleb knocked, as if she had seen the truck coming and had spent the last minute deciding whether to let him stand in the cold. She was an American woman in her late 30s, slim and fragile in build, but held together by a kind of stubborn strength grief had not managed to kill. Her pale face was tired without being weak. Her soft brown eyes carried a quiet sorrow sharpened by years of unanswered questions, and her shoulder-length dark blonde hair was loosely tied back in a way that suggested she had stopped caring about neatness long ago, but not about dignity. She wore a long, faded navy wool coat over a cream-knitted sweater, dark blue jeans, brown winter boots, and a simple gray scarf. There was no jewelry except a plain wedding ring she had never removed. When she saw Caleb, something moved behind her eyes, not surprise exactly, but the recognition of a wound touched without warning. "Caleb Rourke," she said. His name sounded different in her mouth. Not hostile, worse, familiar. Nora. He had planned no speech because every sentence he had ever built for this moment had fallen apart before reaching his tongue. "Aaron called," she said. Her eyes dropped to Vanta, and the hard line of her mouth shifted. "That is him," Caleb nodded. "Vanta," Jonah wrote about him. That hit Caleb harder than accusation would have. Nora stepped back from the doorway. "Then come in before I change my mind." The house smelled of cedar, old paper, and tea gone cold. Photographs lined the living room wall. Jonah Pike smiling with one arm around Nora. Jonah standing with Caleb and two other men beside a transport vehicle. Jonah kneeling beside a military working dog that was not Vanta, his hand resting lightly between the dog's ears. Jonah had been an American male Navy SEAL in his mid-30s, strong and athletic, with a kind, rugged face, warm brown eyes, short sandy brown hair, and light stubble that made him look more approachable than most men in uniform. In the photographs, he wore a complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform, matching blouse and trousers, a plain black belt, and black combat boots. But even in still images, something in him seemed gentler than the work around him. He had been the man who remembered birthdays, who checked the dog's paws after long movement, who could make nervous locals laugh without saying much. Caleb could barely look at him. Nora noticed. "You never came back," she said. Caleb kept his eyes on the photographs. "I know. Not after the funeral. Not after the report. Not after the letters stopped coming. I did not know what to say." Nora gave a small breath that was almost a laugh but had no humor in it. "None of us did. We said things anyway. That is what the living are supposed to do." Aaron stood near the door, quiet, letting the exchange land where it needed to. Vanta moved slowly through the room, not exploring like a pet in a new house, but searching like a working dog, following a scent older than the floorboards. He stopped beneath Jonah's old field jacket hanging on a peg beside the hearth. The jacket had been cleaned, but not enough for a dog. Vanta raised his nose to the sleeve, inhaled, and then did something Caleb had only seen him do once before, years ago, beside a covered stretcher. He lowered himself to the floor and rested his muzzle on the cuff. Nora's face changed. The anger did not vanish, but it lost its armor. She watched Vanta as if the dog had touched a part of Jonah no human hand could reach. "He knew Jonah?" she asked. Caleb had to clear his throat before answering. "Yes." "Did Jonah know he was hurt?" Caleb looked at her then. "I do not know." That was the most honest thing he had said in her house, and maybe the only answer she could accept. Vanta rose after a moment and moved to a small writing desk near the window. Beneath it sat an old metal keepsake box, dark green with scratches along the edges and a dent near the latch. Vanta touched it with his nose, then looked at Caleb. Nora stared at the box. That came back with his things. "You never opened it?" Aaron asked gently. Nora folded her arms across her chest. "I opened the top once, saw his handwriting, put it away. Some doors do not close again after you open them." Caleb understood that better than she knew. "We do not have to." Nora looked at Vanta, still waiting beside the box, calm and certain. Then she crossed the room, knelt with difficulty, and pulled it into the light. Her fingers trembled when she unlatched it. Inside were field notebooks, folded letters, photographs, a burned-edged unit patch, and a small damaged memory card sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve. Nora lifted the first notebook. Jonah's handwriting filled the pages, precise and compact. Dates, weather, equipment checks, dog behavior notes. Eliza would have called it documentation. Jonah would have called it paying attention. Near the final entries, Nora stopped reading aloud and handed the book to Caleb. One line had been underlined twice. Dogs reacted badly after pre-mission medical evaluation. Vanta refused corridor twice. Pike's K9 would not enter assessment bay. Harlan dismissed as stress response. Stahl approved final movement schedule. The name seemed to darken the page. Miles Harlan. Colonel Everett Stoll. Caleb knew Stahl's voice even before memory offered his face. Tall, controlled, silver-haired, speaking in the hospital tent, after night lantern, with the calm authority of a man who had already decided what the truth would be. Some truths should be buried with the dead. Caleb had thought those words were mercy. Now they felt like a lock being turned. Nora found a loose folded letter tucked behind the notebook cover. It was addressed only, "If I do not come home." She did not open it immediately. Instead, she handed Aaron the damaged memory card. "Can this be read?" Aaron looked at it. "Maybe. Tessa might know someone, or she might manage part of it herself." Nora nodded once, then opened the letter. Her eyes moved across the first lines, and all the color left her face. Caleb did not ask to read it. Not yet. Nora spoke in a voice so controlled it sounded borrowed. "He wrote that the dogs were trying to tell them something." She swallowed. "He wrote that if the mission went wrong, someone should check the medical files first, not the tactical report." The room became very still. Vanta stepped closer and leaned his shoulder lightly against Nora's knee. She reached down without thinking and touched the top of his head. The gesture was small, natural, devastating. "I thought I was protecting myself by not opening this," she whispered. "Maybe I was protecting them instead." Caleb looked at the notebook, the letter, the memory card, and the dog who had led them here. For years, he had believed the past was a grave. Now it looked more like evidence. And graves, he was beginning to understand, were not the only places where the truth could be buried. By the time Caleb Rourke returned to Coldwater Ridge Veterinary Clinic, the sun had started to sink behind the Pine Ridge, and the town had taken on that late afternoon stillness that made every sound feel too clear. The truck tires crunched over the thin crust of ice in the parking lot. Vanta lifted his head from the back seat before Caleb opened the door, ears forward, body careful from the pain medication but mind as sharp as ever. The Belgian Malinois had not slept on the drive back from Nora Pike's house. He had watched the road behind them, watched Caleb in the rearview mirror, watched the metal keepsake box on the passenger seat, as if Jonah's old notebooks were not paper but something alive. Caleb sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. The box beside him seemed heavier than it had any right to be. Inside it were Jonah's field notes, a folded letter, a burned-edged patch, photographs from a life that had ended before anyone explained why, and a damaged memory card that might hold nothing, or might hold the first piece of truth Caleb had been denied for years. The clinic lights glowed warm against the glass. Through the window, he could see Tessa Ward moving behind the front desk, with a folder pressed under one arm, and Dr. Eliza Monroe standing near the hallway, her white coat still on, her posture too straight for someone at the end of a long day. Deputy Aaron Vale's cruiser was parked near the side entrance. That meant Aaron had not gone home either. No one had. Caleb realized then that the day had stopped belonging to normal time. It belonged to the kind of time that begins when a lie finally starts to fail. Inside the clinic, Tessa cleared a space on the records desk and set the damaged memory card beneath a small desk lamp. She had changed from fear into focus, which seemed to be her natural survival method. Her petite frame leaned over the workstation. Short chestnut brown hair tucked behind one ear, light brown eyes narrowed with concentration. She wore the same charcoal gray clinic sweater and pale blue scrub top, but now she had added thin blue gloves, not because the memory card was medical evidence yet, but because she treated fragile things with ritual care. "I need to be clear," she said. "I'm not a federal forensic technician. If this becomes official evidence, someone else will have to image it properly." Aaron, standing with his arms folded near the doorway, nodded. His dark brown deputy jacket was still dusted with lake frost from Nora's driveway. "We understand. We just need to know whether there is anything on it worth protecting." Tessa gave him a brief look. "Everything is worth protecting until someone proves it is empty." Caleb liked her more for that. Eliza placed Vanta's updated chart beside the workstation, but did not sit. She looked tired, pale, and composed, which Caleb was beginning to understand meant she was managing more than she was showing. Vanta lowered himself beside Caleb's left boot with a slow care that made Caleb's guilt flare again. The dog rested, but his eyes remained open. Eliza noticed the position and said, "He needs quiet tonight." Caleb looked at the memory card. "So do the dead." No one answered, because there were some sentences that did not ask for response. The first attempt recovered nothing but corrupted file names and gray blocks of broken video. Tessa worked for nearly an hour, switching cables, running a recovery program from an old laptop she kept for damaged clinic files, copying the contents without altering the original card. Aaron logged each step in his notebook, not because he expected a courtroom yet, but because he was starting to treat the truth like something that could be attacked. Eliza compared Jonah's field notes with the medical codes she had once written down in her own private records. Caleb watched her pull a small notebook from her coat pocket. It was black, worn at the corners, filled with neat handwriting and clipped abbreviations. "You kept that," he said. Eliza did not look up. "I kept several." "Why?" Her pen stopped over one line. "Because when people tell you that you imagined a pattern, you either let them make you doubt your own eyes, or you start writing down exactly what your eyes saw." Caleb thought of the years he had let official language replace memory. Weather conditions, tactical failure, enemy movement, unrecoverable variables, clean phrases for unclean loss. Tessa suddenly straightened. "I have audio." Everyone in the room went still. The recovered file was short and badly damaged. Static filled most of it. Then Jonah Pike's voice came through, thin, distant, but unmistakably human. "Dogs are refusing the bay again," Harlan says, stress response. "Stall signed movement anyway. If this goes bad, check the dogs first. They know before we do." The file cut out. Vanta lifted his head before the last word finished, his ears standing high. Caleb felt the room tilt around him. Vanta rose despite the pain and walked to the old photographs Nora had sent with the box. He did not sniff all of them. He chose one. Jonah kneeling beside a military working dog while Caleb stood in the background, younger, harder, unaware of the future. Vanta placed one paw gently on the edge of the photograph, not enough to damage it, only enough to hold it still. Then he looked at Caleb. In that silent exchange, Caleb understood something that no recovered file could explain. The dog had not only remembered a smell or a command, he had remembered a warning no one had honored. And maybe loyalty was not only staying beside the living, maybe loyalty was also refusing to let the dead be misremembered. The recovered audio changed the room. Until then, they had been dealing with suspicion, medical inconsistency, and an old grief sharpened by new questions. Now they had Jonah's voice naming Harlan and Stall in the same breath as the dog's behavior. It was not enough to prove everything. Aaron said that twice, carefully, because he was the one person in the room whose job required him to think about what could survive scrutiny. But it was enough to justify caution. It was enough to make copies. It was enough to make sure nothing stayed in only one place. Tessa created 3 digital backups and wrote each file hash into her notes because she said, very quietly, that clean records mattered when people expected messy ones. Eliza spread her private notes beside Jonah's notebook. Some of the codes matched. Not many, but enough. Vanta's identifier, 2 other K9 designations from Night Lantern. One dog listed in Jonah's notes as refusing the assessment corridor had later appeared in Eliza's recovery records with resolved mobility strain marked across a file she remembered disagreeing with. 17, Eliza said at last. Caleb turned to her. "What?" "Possible K9 cases connected to Night Lantern with inconsistent records. I can't confirm all of them yet. Some are only partial numbers, some are initials, but there are at least 17 worth checking." Aaron exhaled through his nose. "That moves this beyond one bad clearance." "It was never one bad clearance," Eliza said. The bitterness in her voice appeared and disappeared so quickly that only Caleb seemed to catch it. The front door opened at 5:42 p.m., and every head turned because the clinic had closed to regular appointments at 5. The man who stepped inside did not look like someone who had arrived by accident. He was an American man in his early 50s, tall and polished, with a smooth but cold face, narrow, calculating blue eyes, neatly combed salt and pepper hair, and a controlled diplomatic smile that seemed designed to make refusal look unreasonable. He was clean-shaven and wore a dark charcoal overcoat over a crisp white dress shirt, muted navy tie, dark tailored trousers, polished black leather shoes, and black leather gloves held in one hand. A slim black document folder rested under his arm. Miles Harlan looked exactly like the kind of man who could stand in front of a ruined thing and call it a complicated process. Dr. Monroe, he said warmly, I apologize for arriving unannounced. Eliza's face did not move. Then leave unannounced. Harlan's smile did not falter, but his eyes shifted. They moved over Tessa's laptop, Aaron's uniform, Caleb's face, then down to Vanta. The dog stood, slowly, carefully, painfully. But when he was upright, he placed himself in front of Caleb with his body angled toward Harlan, chest steady, ears forward, a low growl forming deep enough that no one mistook it for noise. Harlan stopped 2 steps inside the door. That must be Vanta, he said. Caleb's voice was flat. You know my dog. I know many dogs from that era. He knows you, Caleb said. Harlan tried to make the room smaller by speaking gently. That was the trick of men like him. They never raised their voice unless they had already lost control. He said he had heard there were concerns about old assessment records. He said programs during wartime often produced imperfect paperwork. He said grief, trauma, and animal aging could make patterns appear where none existed. He looked at Eliza when he said trauma. He looked at Caleb when he said grief. He looked at Nora's box when he said paperwork. Aaron moved away from the wall, slow enough not to provoke, clear enough to warn. How did you know to come here? Aaron asked. Harlan gave him a courteous glance. Small towns are not known for secrecy, deputy. That is not an answer. It is the polite version of one. Tessa's fingers hovered near the laptop, and Caleb saw the screen dim as she quietly closed the recovered audio window. Harlan noticed that too. Of course he did. I would advise all of you, Harlan continued, not to build accusations on damaged media and misunderstood animal behavior. Dr. Monroe, in particular, knows how dangerous that can be. Her prior concerns were reviewed thoroughly. Eliza's eyes hardened. Caleb finally understood what Harlan had come to do. Not to deny, not yet. To make each of them feel alone inside their weakest place. Before Caleb could speak, the clinic's side door opened, and Dr. Malcolm Greer stepped in with the slow irritation of a man who disliked being summoned after supper. He wore a dark olive wool cardigan over a light blue button-up shirt, dark brown trousers, polished brown leather shoes, and carried a worn leather medical satchel. His silver-gray beard was neatly trimmed, his pale blue eyes sharp behind rectangular reading glasses. I was told there was a dog with an old hip trauma, and people pretending paperwork could heal bone, he said. Then he saw Harlan. Ah, that explains the smell. Harlan's polite mask tightened. Dr. Greer. I did not realize you were involved. Greer walked past him as if Harlan were furniture placed poorly in a hallway. I am involved whenever someone asks me whether an obvious injury is obvious. He took the printed imaging report from Eliza, scanned it, and handed it back. For the record, anyone who cleared this dog without noting significant orthopedic concern either did not conduct a proper evaluation or had a reason not to record one. Aaron wrote that down. Harlan saw him do it, and for the first time his expression changed. Not fear, calculation. Be careful, Harlan said softly. All of you. Careers have ended over less confusion than this. Vanta's growl deepened. Caleb placed one hand lightly on his collar. Mine already ended, Caleb said. That makes me hard to scare. Harlan left without touching anything, which made Caleb trust the visit even less. Men who came only to intimidate often wanted the target to remember their presence more than their action. After the door closed, the clinic seemed to breathe again. Aaron locked the front entrance. Tessa immediately copied the recovered audio to an encrypted external drive and placed the original memory card in a sealed evidence envelope, labeling it with time, date, and chain of custody notes as best she could. Greer examined Vanta briefly and confirmed what Eliza had already warned. The dog needed rest, full blood work, and a specialist consult before any major decision. Caleb listened, but his eyes kept drifting to the door Harlan had used. Eliza noticed. He wanted to see what we had, she said. And who had it? Aaron nodded. Then we assume he knows enough to move against the weakest point. Tessa looked up. The clinic server. For the first time since Caleb had met her, her voice shook. Most of the old scanned records are stored here. Eliza's hand went still over Vanta's chart. Aaron said, back them up now. Tessa was already moving. They stayed until after dark. Greer left first, muttering that old men were not built to babysit cowards in expensive coats. Aaron drove past the block twice before heading to the sheriff's office to file an expanded report. Eliza closed the clinic with Tessa while Caleb helped Vanta into the truck, promising to return in the morning for blood work, but Caleb did not go home immediately. He parked across the street near the closed laundromat, lights off, watching the clinic through the windshield. Vanta lay in the back seat, exhausted but awake. At 9:13 p.m., a shadow moved behind the clinic. Caleb was out of the truck before thought became decision. He did not run in blind. He moved along the wall, silent, controlled, every old habit alive. The side door stood cracked open. Inside, the records room had been disturbed. Drawers pulled, one cabinet forced, a workstation awake when it should have been dark. Whoever had come was gone. Eliza and Tessa arrived minutes later after Caleb called them. Nothing obvious was missing from the front, but the old storage room lock had been scratched, and the crate from Night Lantern had been shifted. Vanta, despite Caleb's command to stay, limped to the rear threshold and lowered his nose near the floor. He followed a scent to the back exit, where a small strip of dark fabric had snagged on the doorframe. Eliza crouched near it and went pale again. "Military-grade chemical glove," she said. "Same disinfectant residue." Caleb looked into the dark behind the clinic, then down at Vanta. The dog's eyes were fixed on the alley, steady and certain. The files had been cleaned once. Tonight, someone had come back to clean what was left. Special Agent Mara Ellison arrived in Coldwater Ridge the next morning in a dark government SUV that looked too clean for a town where every road carried pine, mud, snowmelt, and old gravel. She parked outside the veterinary clinic at 7:18 a.m., stepped out without hurry, and took in the building, the alley, the back door, the damaged lock, and the line of Caleb Rourke's truck across the street before she said a single word. Mara was an American female federal investigator in her early 40s, with an athletic professional build, a sharp composed face, dark brown eyes that missed very little, and black hair tied into a low, neat ponytail. She wore a dark navy field jacket over a white collared shirt, black tactical-style trousers, practical black boots, and a simple federal badge clipped to her belt. She carried a slim case file and a phone. No sunglasses, no unnecessary accessories, no performance of authority beyond the quiet certainty that she had it. Her expression was not cold, but it was disciplined. She looked like a woman who had learned to distrust both panic and certainty, which made Caleb dislike and respect her within the same breath. Deputy Aaron Vale met her at the front door, his winter deputy jacket zipped against the morning wind, his square-weathered face heavier than usual. "Agent Ellison?" he asked. "Mara is fine until someone lies to me," she said. Aaron glanced toward the clinic. "Then you may want to stay formal." She did not smile, but something in her eyes acknowledged the line. Inside, Dr. Eliza Monroe stood beside the records desk with Tessa Ward, Jonah Pike's metal keepsake box, Vanta's imaging, the recovered audio transcript, and 3 sealed evidence envelopes laid out with careful spacing. Caleb stood near the hallway with Vanta beside him. The Belgian Malinois looked exhausted from pain and medication, but his tan tactical vest was straight, his black masked face alert, his dark amber eyes fixed on Mara as if he were evaluating whether she belonged in the room. Mara looked back at the dog first, not Caleb. "That is Vanta." Caleb's hand lowered to the dog's collar. "Yes." Mara studied the way Vanta stood, the small protection of the left side, the controlled balance that hid discomfort by habit. "He is still working," she said quietly. Caleb's jaw tightened. "He is retired." "That was not what I said." Mara did not accept the story all at once. That was the first thing Caleb noticed, and strangely, it made her more credible. She asked for sequence, not emotion. She wanted to know when Vanta first showed symptoms, when Eliza performed imaging, when Dr. Malcolm Greer reviewed it, when the call came in, who handled the memory card, what recovery process Tessa used, where the original media had been stored, when Harlan arrived, what exactly he said, who saw him when the clinic was closed, how the break-in was discovered, and whether anyone touched the dark fabric strip from the rear door before it was bagged. Tessa answered with the precision of someone who had spent the night replaying every step in case a single gap could undo everything. Eliza gave medical details cleanly, without dramatizing. Aaron provided the police report, the call log, and his notes from Nora Pike's house. Caleb said less than anyone, not because he had nothing to say, but because the parts that mattered most were the parts he trusted least in his own memory. When Mara played the recovered audio, Jonah's damaged voice filled the records room again. Dogs refusing the bay, Harlan calling it stress, Stahl signing movement anyway. Mara listened once, then a second time with her eyes closed. When it ended, she opened them and looked at Caleb. This is not enough to prove a conspiracy. Caleb's face hardened. I know, but it is enough to protect the material and widen the inquiry. Eliza exhaled softly. Mara turned to her. You were right not to send this to anyone through an unsecured channel. Eliza's expression did not change, but Caleb saw her shoulders lower by a fraction. For someone who had been dismissed for years, even that cautious validation landed like a handhold in deep water. By mid-morning, Mara had moved the case from rumor into process. She contacted a regional evidence technician to properly image the memory card. She had Aaron secure the clinic break-in as a local criminal incident with potential federal relevance. She took possession of a copy of Vanta's imaging, while leaving the clinical originals in Eliza's medical system. She asked Tessa to preserve server logs without running unnecessary searches that could alter metadata. Curiosity damages evidence, Mara said. Tessa nodded as if someone had finally spoken her language. Then Aaron brought out the partial address string from one of the cleaned files. It had appeared twice in the data Tessa recovered from clinic backups, a service location code tied to a private K9 rehabilitation vendor registered under the name North Star Companion Recovery. On paper, North Star had closed 2 years earlier. On paper, it had no active animals, no staff, no operating facility, and no reason to appear in any current record. But the address code pointed to land beyond the North Pine Road, near a service route most locals avoided in winter. Aaron knew the area. Old County Maintenance Road, he said. A few hunting cabins, one abandoned feed depot, and a property that used to have chain fencing. Mara looked at him. Used to? I have not been out that way since last spring. Caleb had been silent too long. We go now. Mara's eyes moved to him slowly. No. I go when I have authority to go, and you do not go anywhere near the interior until I decide your presence is useful and not destructive. Caleb stepped forward. Vanta rose with him, slower but immediate. Mara did not move back. You want this to survive? She asked. Then do not hand Harlan a reason to call it trespass, contamination, or retaliation by a traumatized former handler. The words hit because they were true. Caleb hated true things when they arrived from strangers. Eliza said quietly, she is right. Caleb looked at Vanta, then at the sealed memory card. He forced himself to stop, then get authority. While Mara stepped outside to make the call, Vanta limped to the front window and stared toward the north road. Nobody had said the address out loud in the dog's presence. Nobody had shown him a map. Yet his body oriented with absolute certainty, ears forward, nose lifted, eyes fixed past the glass and the town, and the pale morning beyond it. Tessa whispered, how does he know? Caleb did not answer. Eliza stood beside him, watching the dog with a look that was not fear and not science alone. Some bonds were trained, some were remembered, and some, Caleb was beginning to believe, were God's way of leaving a thread for the lost to follow. It took 4 hours to do what Caleb would have done in 10 minutes, and what Mara insisted had to be done correctly. A preliminary warrant came through based on the clinic break-in, the recovered records, the old North Star vendor codes, and the risk of animal welfare violations. Aaron brought 2 deputies for perimeter support, both local men Mara trusted only after confirming they had no connection to Harlan, Stahl, or North Star. Caleb was allowed to come only as far as the outer service road, with Vanta remaining on lead and under Eliza's medical restriction. He is not searching, Eliza told Mara before Caleb could object. He is injured, Mara agreed. He identifies scent from outside if needed, nothing more. Caleb almost argued, but Vanta leaned lightly against his leg, and the pressure reminded him that love did not always mean pushing forward. Sometimes it meant stopping where the body asked to stop. The property lay behind a line of black pines bent by wind. The sign was gone, but the posts remained. Chain fencing sagged along the perimeter, half hidden by brush and old snow. A service gate hung crooked on one hinge. The main building was a low concrete structure, with boarded windows and a roof patched in mismatched metal sheets. On paper, it was closed. In reality, fresh tire marks cut through the mud near the side entrance. Mara saw them before anyone pointed. Aaron photographed them. Tessa was not there. Mara had kept her at the clinic to preserve digital records, which Tessa accepted only after extracting a promise that no device from the facility would be powered on without forensic imaging. Eliza walked beside Caleb near the outer fence, her dark auburn hair tucked beneath a plain knit cap now, her white coat replaced by a dark winter jacket over teal scrubs. She watched Vanta more than the building. The dog's breathing had changed. Not panic. Recognition. Caleb felt it through the lead. Mara and Aaron entered first with the deputies. The inside smelled of cold concrete, stale disinfectant, old fur, and abandonment that had happened too carefully. Empty kennels lined one corridor. Clipboards had been stripped from hooks. A metal cart lay on its side. There were no dramatic signs, no obvious cruelty staged for easy outrage. That made it worse. The place looked like someone had removed the story and left only the grammar. Mara called Eliza in after the first sweep. Caleb was made to wait at the threshold until Mara cleared the corridor, which tested every remaining thread of his self-control. Vanta stood beside him, trembling slightly now from pain or memory. Caleb could not tell. Inside, Eliza found medication charts torn in half, dosage labels without patient names, and a disposal bin that should have been empty in a closed facility, but was not. Aaron found a burned pile of paper in a utility sink. Most of it had turned to ash, but one corner survived with 3 printed characters. NL7, Night Lantern. Caleb saw it from the doorway and felt the old world tilt. Mara found a storage room with old restraint bands, some identical to the one from the clinic crate. On the back wall, under peeling paint, someone had once written a schedule in marker. Most of it had been scrubbed, but Eliza could still read fragments. Gait test, load tolerance, pain response, behavioral compliance. This was not a sanctuary, she said. Her voice was controlled, but fury sat underneath it. This was an assessment site. Mara took photographs. For animals officially in placement, Eliza looked at the empty kennels, or animals they did not want officially seen. Then Vanta pulled. Not hard. He knew better, even in pain. But the lead tightened toward a small structure behind the main building, half concealed by stacked pallets and dead brush. Caleb called to Mara. She came back, saw the dog's fixed posture, and after one look at Eliza, nodded. Slowly, the outbuilding door was shut with a sliding bolt, but not locked. Aaron opened it. The smell came out first: old straw, cold metal, waste, and living breath. Inside was one kennel, one water bowl tipped against the wall, and one dog. The elderly Belgian Malinois lay curled on a blanket that had gone flat with use. He was around 9 or 10 years old, thin and weakened, with a faded fawn coat, gray around his muzzle and eyes, dull but gentle amber eyes, and ears still upright though softened by age. He wore an old brown working dog collar with a faded identification tag. No vest, no comfort. His hind legs looked stiff even before he tried to move. When the door opened, he lifted his head but did not bark. Vanta stepped forward as far as Caleb allowed and lowered himself to the ground outside the kennel. The old dog's cloudy eyes shifted to him. For a moment, neither animal moved. Then the elderly Malinois gave one weak thump of his tail against the blanket. Eliza covered her mouth with one hand, not to hide shock, but to hold herself steady. Mara crouched near the tag and read the number aloud. Eliza went still. Aaron checked it against the partial list from Jonah's notes. The number belonged to a K9 marked as transferred to a handler adoption program after Night Lantern. Not here. Not abandoned. Not forgotten. On paper, he had gone home. Caleb knelt beside Vanta, one hand on the dog's vest, the other gripping the cold ground. He understood then why Vanta had never let the old mission die quietly inside him. The truth was not only in files. It was breathing in a locked-out building, thin and tired, waiting for someone to come back. Mara's voice became very quiet. This facility is now fully sealed. Aaron was already calling for animal transport and a second veterinary unit. Eliza moved carefully toward the elderly dog, speaking low, letting him see every motion before she made it. The old Malinois watched her with the exhausted dignity of a working animal that had endured too much and still tried to cooperate. Vanta did not rise. He stayed low, steady, facing the same direction as Caleb, as if guarding both the living dog and the memory of every dog that might not have lasted long enough to be found. Caleb looked at Mara. Still not enough? Mara met his eyes. Now it is a case. Outside, wind moved through the pines. Inside the outbuilding, the old dog breathed. Vanta watched, and Caleb felt the shape of the lie finally become large enough that no one honest could pretend not to see it. The elderly Belgian Malinois did not cry when they lifted him from the outbuilding. That was the first thing Caleb Rourke noticed, and it hurt him more than if the dog had made any sound at all. The old K9 simply watched every movement with dull amber eyes, his faded fawn coat lying thin over a body that had once been built for strength and speed. His gray muzzle resting against the edge of the transport blanket, as if he had learned long ago that protest changed nothing. "Doctor," Eliza Monroe spoke to him the entire time in a low, even voice, her dark auburn hair tucked beneath her knit cap, her face composed in that careful way Caleb had begun to recognize as anger folded into usefulness. Vanta stood beside Caleb at the edge of the North Star property, held back by the lead and by his own damaged body, but every line of him leaned toward the old dog. He was still the full-grown Belgian Malinois K9. Caleb knew deep fawn to mahogany coat, black facial mask, upright ears, tan tactical vest, working collar, focused obedience. But the mission-ready posture had shifted into something more solemn. He was not trying to chase. He was not trying to protect Caleb from danger. He was standing vigil. Special Agent Mara Ellison sealed the outbuilding with a calm that did not disguise the urgency beneath it. Deputy Aaron Vale photographed the transport, the collar tag, the kennel, the old blanket, the empty water bowl, the scuffed concrete. Every small thing became part of a chain, because Mara kept reminding them that the truth had already been buried once under paperwork, and this time every inch of it would be made to stand. Caleb wanted to help lift the old dog, but Eliza stopped him with a look. "Let the medical team do it," she said. "You take care of Vanta," he almost argued. Then Vanta shifted weight off his left hip and gave one short, controlled breath through his nose. Caleb closed his mouth and obeyed the only order that mattered. Back at Coldwater Ridge Veterinary Clinic, the building felt different. The same crooked golden retriever painting hung above the front desk. The same antiseptic smell lived under the warmth of the lobby. The same outdated chairs sat under the windows. But now, the clinic had become something larger than a place where people brought pets for vaccines and stitches. It had become the first safe room the truth had found. Tessa Ward stood at the records desk with her tablet, her short chestnut brown bob tucked behind her ear, her petite body tense but steady in the charcoal gray clinic sweater and pale blue scrub top she had worn through 2 impossible days. She had prepared intake forms for an animal who officially should not have been there. When the old Malinois was carried in, Tessa looked at his faded collar tag and whispered, "He has a number." Mara heard her and said, "Then he has a record." Eliza and Dr. Malcolm Greer examined him in the large recovery kennel at the end of the hall. Greer had come back despite swearing the night before that he was too old to be dragged into other people's cowardice. The elderly veterinary orthopedic specialist looked even more severe under the clinic lights. Tall but slightly stooped, silver gray hair combed back, pale blue eyes behind thin rectangular reading glasses, neatly trimmed gray beard set around a mouth that seemed built to disapprove of both lies and bad technique. He ran his hands along the old dog's spine, hips, and rear legs with surprising gentleness. "Chronic orthopedic neglect," he said at last, voice hard. "Old load-bearing trauma, long-term compensation, muscle loss from untreated pain." Similar pattern to Vanta, but worse. Eliza nodded once. She had already known. Hearing it confirmed did not make it easier. Caleb stood outside the kennel with Vanta pressed against his leg, and for the first time in years, he understood that guilt could multiply beyond what one man had room to carry. Mara began widening the investigation before noon. She had the collar tag cross-referenced against the partial night lantern list, then against vendor transfer records, handler adoption logs, and old North Star service invoices. The elderly Malinois had been listed as transferred to a handler adoption program 4 years earlier. The address attached to that transfer was real, but the family at that address had never received him. Aaron made the local welfare report official. Tessa preserved the clinic's copies and marked each file with timestamps. Eliza wrote the medical findings with clinical restraint, refusing to use emotional words when the facts were more damning than outrage. Caleb watched everyone work and felt useless in a way that made his skin itch. He had spent most of his life being useful in crisis. He could move, lift, breach, carry, protect, decide. But here, usefulness looked like waiting, while women with clipboards and men with cameras built the kind of case that could survive lawyers. Mara finally looked up from her phone and said, "Harlan has agreed to come in for a recorded interview." Aaron's eyebrows rose. "That was fast. Too fast," Mara said. "Which means he believes he can control the shape of the conversation." Caleb's voice was low. "He has done that before." Mara looked at him. "Then we make sure he does it on record." Before Harlan arrived, Vanta limped to the recovery kennel where the elderly Malinois lay under a warming blanket. Caleb started to stop him, but Eliza lifted one hand. "Let him choose." Vanta lowered himself outside the kennel door with visible effort and placed his muzzle against the metal bars. The old dog opened his eyes. For several seconds, neither animal moved. Then the old Malinois pushed his nose forward until it touched Vanta's through the barrier. 2 wounded K9s, one still carrying the mission, one almost erased by it, breathing the same air at last. Caleb felt something in the room shift, like a prayer spoken without words. If justice had a beginning, maybe it did not sound like a judge's gavel. Maybe it sounded like 2 tired dogs recognizing that neither one had been forgotten. Miles Harlan arrived at the sheriff's annex just after 2 in the afternoon. Mara did not let him return to the clinic. She wanted controlled space, cameras, recording, witness separation, and no chance for him to read the whole room before choosing which weak point to press. Caleb was not permitted inside the interview room, which nearly led to the first real argument between him and Mara. She won because she did not argue like someone trying to dominate. She argued like someone protecting the case. "He wants you reactive," she told Caleb in the hallway. "Do not become useful to him." So Caleb stood behind the one-way glass with Aaron and listened. Harlan looked as polished as before. Dark charcoal overcoat removed and folded over the chair back. White dress shirt crisp. Muted navy tie centered. Salt and pepper hair perfect. Narrow blue eyes calm. He did not look like a man cornered. He looked like a man inconvenienced by people who had failed to appreciate procedure. Mara sat across from him, her dark ponytail neat, field jacket still on, case file closed in front of her. She did not show him the old dog first. She asked about North Star companion recovery. Harlan said North Star had provided transitional care for working animals during an overloaded retirement cycle. She asked why animals listed as adopted were found in a facility North Star claimed was closed. Harlan said records from that period were complicated. She asked why Vanta's retirement clearance omitted significant orthopedic injury. Harlan said he was not a veterinarian. She asked why his name appeared in Jonah Pike's recovered audio. For the first time, Harlan paused half a second too long. "Recovered audio can be misleading," he said. Mara opened the file. "So can clean paperwork." Eliza gave her own recorded statement next. Caleb watched from the hallway as she sat in the annex interview room, hands folded, white coat replaced by a dark sweater, but her posture as controlled as it had been in the clinic. She described her old role in military K9 recovery, the animals she had flagged, the concerns that had been closed without action, and the evaluation files that did not match what she had seen with her own hands. Mara asked whether anyone had challenged her credibility at the time. Eliza's face did not change. "Yes." "Who?" Miles Harlan initiated the review language. Colonel Everett Stahl's office accepted it. Caleb felt the name like a temperature drop. Stahl. The man with a hard rectangular face, cold steel gray eyes, short silver hair combed back, and the kind of formal military authority that made silence look like discipline. In Caleb's memory, Stahl wore a dark green dress uniform with minimal official medals, polished black shoes, no hat, no weapon, hands behind his back as he stood beside Caleb's hospital bed after night lantern. He had looked controlled, almost sorrowful, but not broken, not like a man who had lost people, like a man who had already calculated the cost. Eliza continued. My concerns were marked as noted, then they disappeared into review. Mara asked, why did you keep personal records? Eliza looked through the glass, though she could not see Caleb, because I knew the dogs were not lying. Then, Caleb was called. The room felt too small when he stepped inside. He remained in his complete green digital camouflage uniform, blouse and trousers properly fitted, plain black belt, black combat boots, no extra gear, no visible weapon, no armor to hide behind. Mara asked if he was ready. Caleb almost said yes, because soldiers always said yes. Instead, he looked through the small window toward the hallway where Vanta lay with Aaron outside the door, and said, no, but I will do it. He told the story of Night Lantern in pieces, because that was how memory had left it to him. The pre-mission evaluation bay. The dogs resisting the corridor. Jonah frowning over his notebook. Harlan calling the behavior stress. Stahl signing the final movement schedule. Vanta refusing a command before the team advanced, planting himself in the dust, eyes fixed ahead, body shaking with a warning Caleb had mistaken for disobedience under pressure. Caleb told how he had pulled Vanta forward because the mission clock was moving and orders had already been given. His voice thinned there, but it did not break. Mara did not interrupt. Caleb described waking after the operation with the world reduced to ceiling canvas, pain, and the absence of men whose voices had been part of his life. He described Stahl visiting him afterward, hands behind his back, face solemn, saying, some truths should be buried with the dead. Mara wrote that down word for word. Caleb looked at the page and realized the sentence had lived in him for years like shrapnel. Now it was evidence. By evening, the pressure finally changed shape. Mara returned to the clinic with Aaron, Eliza, and Caleb because the old Malinois had stabilized enough for transport to a regional veterinary center, and Vanta needed his scheduled blood work before the next day's specialist consult. Tessa met them with red eyes and a new set of printed logs. Harlan's auxiliary account touched 3 of the old transfer files, she said, but not all of them. Mara looked at the pages. Who touched the others? Tessa pointed to a code. Administrative Command Authorization. Not a name, but the access tier is higher than Harlan. Mara's mouth tightened. Stahl's office. Aaron swore softly under his breath. At that moment, Mara's phone rang. She listened for less than 30 seconds before stepping into the hall. When she came back, her expression had changed. Harlan is revising his statement. Caleb looked up. Meaning? Meaning he wants consideration. Eliza's voice was flat. He is giving someone up. Mara nodded. He says Colonel Everett Stahl approved the final medical clearance protocol and directed adverse findings to be reclassified as non-limiting unless an animal was completely unable to function. Greer, who had been standing beside the recovery kennel, made a disgusted sound. So if the dog could still stand, they called it fit. No one corrected him. Harlan was brought through the clinic's rear corridor under supervision later that night because Mara needed him to identify a storage format found at North Star before it was transferred. He looked less polished now. Not ruined, not frightened, but thinner somehow, as if the first layer of his control had been removed. Caleb stood beside Vanta, near the recovery kennel, one hand on the dog's collar. Harlan's eyes moved to the elderly Malinois, then to Vanta, then to Caleb. For a moment, the smooth man from the day before was gone. What remained was smaller and meaner. You think this gives it back? Harlan asked quietly. Mara immediately said, do not engage. Caleb did not move. Harlan's mouth twisted. You want to know what your dog really did that night? Caleb's blood went cold. Eliza stepped closer, but Caleb kept his eyes on Harlan. Say it. Harlan looked at Mara, then at the recording device in Aaron's hand, and smiled without warmth. The original field report said Vanta alerted before the team entered the kill zone. It said the K9 resisted forward movement and attempted to redirect the handler. That line was removed from the final report because it raised questions no one wanted in the after-action review. The hall went silent. Vanta stared at Harlan, ears forward, body trembling not from pain now but from recognition. Harlan leaned in just enough for Caleb to hear every word. "Your dog tried to stop it. The report was cleaned." Mara ordered him moved. Aaron took his arm and guided him away before Caleb could decide whether rage was a thing he would survive. Eliza turned toward Caleb, but he had already dropped to one knee beside Vanta. He placed both hands gently on the dog's head and pressed his forehead to the black mask between Vanta's eyes. For years, he had thought Vanta survived the mission with him. Now he knew Vanta had tried to save them all before the first shot ever mattered. Caleb closed his eyes. "I hear you now," he whispered. "This time, I hear you." For a long time after Harlan was taken out through the rear corridor, Caleb Rourke stayed on one knee beside Vanta and did not move. The clinic hallway remained full of quiet sounds, the hum of the old lights, the faint rustle of Eliza Monroe turning a page in the medical chart, the low voice of Special Agent Mara Ellison speaking to Deputy Aaron Vale near the back door, the soft mechanical breath of the recovery kennel, where the elderly Belgian Malinois rested beneath a warming blanket. But Caleb heard almost none of it. All he heard was Harlan's sentence repeating in his head, "Your dog tried to stop it. The report was cleaned." For years, Caleb had carried Night Lantern like a personal sentence, a private failure written in fire and silence. He had believed Vanta survived with him because luck had chosen them and not the others. Now he understood something more painful and more holy. Vanta had not simply survived the mission. Vanta had resisted it. Vanta had known there was danger ahead before the men with ranks and signatures allowed themselves to hear it. Caleb kept both hands gently on the Belgian Malinois' head, feeling the warmth beneath the black facial mask, the steady life under his palms. Vanta, still in his tan tactical vest and working dog collar, stood motionless with the focused obedience of a K9 who had spent his whole life waiting for a command. But there was no command now. Only Caleb whispering, "I hear you," as if saying it once could reach backward through all the years when he had not. Eliza eventually crouched beside them. She was still wearing her dark teal scrubs beneath a winter jacket, her pale, composed face tired, her gray-green eyes softer than before. "He needs rest," she said. Caleb nodded, but did not rise immediately. Eliza did not rush him. That was one of the ways she helped, by knowing when silence was treatment too. The next days did not bring the clean satisfaction stories sometimes promise. Colonel Everett Stahl was not dragged away in front of cameras before sunset. There was no public confession, no instant justice, no single dramatic document that made every wrong person powerless at once. Mara explained that cases involving senior contracting authority moved through layers: warrants, financial records, internal review, military legal channels, federal coordination, witness protection, evidence authentication. Caleb hated every word of that, because every word sounded like time, and time was the thing the dogs had already spent. But Mara did not soften the truth to make him feel better. She stood in the clinic records room with her dark navy field jacket zipped, black hair tied into its low ponytail, sharp composed face showing the wear of 3 nearly sleepless days, and said, "Fast mistakes are how men like Stahl survive. We move carefully so this does not become another file someone can bury." Caleb did not like it, but he understood it. Harlan's revised statement opened the first door. Tessa Ward's preserved server logs opened another. Dr. Malcolm Greer's orthopedic reports gave the medical pattern weight. Eliza's old notes gave the pattern history. Jonah Pike's audio gave it a human voice. Vanta and the elderly Malinois gave it breath. Within a week, Mara's team had identified 48 K9s still possibly alive in placement, foster, or private care. 17 were flagged for urgent reassessment. 11 were already gone, and those names were handled carefully, not as numbers, but as lives whose suffering had finally been given the dignity of being correctly named. Eliza built the first clinical screening sheet at the clinic's small break room table, writing down what to look for: hidden weight shifting, sleep side preference, reluctance on stairs, controlled breathing under pain, sudden reactions to metal sounds, handler-bonded masking. Caleb watched her work and realized she was doing for strangers what no one had done for Vanta soon enough. Vanta's surgery happened 9 days after the old North Star facility was sealed. The regional veterinary center was 2 hours away, larger and brighter than Coldwater Ridge Veterinary Clinic. with polished floors and machines that looked too new to belong to the world Caleb trusted. The surgeon was a calm woman named Dr. Reena Patel, an Indian-American veterinary orthopedic surgeon in her early 40s, with a compact athletic build, warm brown skin, clear dark eyes, and black hair pulled into a precise low braid. She wore navy surgical scrubs, a white coat, practical clogs, and a plain silver watch, and she had the quiet confidence of someone who did not need dramatic language to prove competence. She examined Vanta with respect, explaining every step to Caleb as if Caleb were not simply an owner but a handler who needed to understand the mission plan. "The repair is possible," she said. "Recovery will not be quick. He will have good days and bad days. You cannot let his willingness outrun his healing." Caleb looked at Vanta, who stood beside him, alert and steady, even with pain running through his body like an old order. "That may be harder than the surgery," Caleb said. Dr. Patel's expression softened. "For both of you." Caleb waited through the operation in a chair by the window, his full green digital camouflage uniform, looking out of place among families holding cat carriers and plastic coffee cups. He did not pace because Eliza had told him pacing made fear feel useful when it was not. He sat with both boots flat on the floor, hands clasped, eyes on the surgical door. When Dr. Patel finally came out and said the repair had gone well, Caleb did not ask whether Vanta would be the same. He had learned enough now not to ask for impossible things. He only asked, "Will he hurt less?" Dr. Patel nodded. "Yes, if you let him heal." Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. "Then I will learn." The first night after surgery, when Vanta was still groggy and bandaged, Caleb sat beside the recovery pen with one hand through the bars. Near midnight, Vanta opened his eyes and tried to lift his head, still searching, still checking, still trying to stand guard even when his body had finally been given permission to rest. Caleb leaned close and whispered, "No mission tonight." Vanta blinked slowly, then lowered his head onto Caleb's hand. For the first time Caleb could remember, the dog slept without facing the door. Caleb sat there in the dim veterinary light, tears silent on his face, and understood that healing did not always arrive like victory. Sometimes it arrived as a wounded dog finally trusting the world enough to close both eyes. Winter settled deeper over Coldwater Ridge while Vanta recovered. Caleb's life changed by inches. Instead of long patrols around the property, there were short, measured walks. Instead of sudden commands, there were soft stops. Instead of expecting Vanta to push through discomfort, Caleb learned to read the smaller truths. The shift of a paw, the tightening near the eyes, the breath held half a second too long. Eliza checked on them twice a week, sometimes at the clinic, sometimes by phone. Tessa organized the incoming reassessment files from other K9 handlers and built a tracking system no one had asked her to build but everyone soon depended on. Aaron coordinated with Mara whenever local contacts were needed. Dr. Greer grumbled his way through consultations, calling half the old records administrative camouflage and the other half cowardice with formatting. The elderly Malinois from North Star was transferred to a long-term medical foster after stabilization, but not before Caleb visited him one last time. The old dog lifted his head when Vanta entered the room and thumped his tail once, still weak but alive. That single movement felt like a verdict more powerful than any courtroom sentence. Nora Pike returned to the story quietly as she had entered it. She came to Caleb's cabin one afternoon carrying Jonah's metal box, not to take it back, but to leave it with him until the investigation no longer needed copies. Snow clung to the shoulders of her faded navy wool coat, and her dark blonde hair was loosely tied back beneath the gray scarf she wore against the cold. She looked around the cabin and saw the life Caleb had built like a punishment. Clean, sparse, functional, almost empty, except for Vanta's bed near the stove. "Jonah would hate this place," she said. Caleb almost smiled. He would say it needs curtains. He would say it needs people. That landed harder. They stood on the porch while Vanta rested inside. Nora looked toward the old shed, the one Vanta had stared at before all of this began. "I was angry you lived," she said. Caleb did not defend himself. Nora continued. "Then I was angry you disappeared. Then I was angry because being angry was easier than missing him." Caleb looked at the snow gathering on the porch rail. "I should have come." "Yes, she said. There was mercy in the honesty, but not erasure. "But you are here now," she asked him to help repair the fence Jonah had started years ago at her lake house. It was not forgiveness spoken as a grand gesture. It was work offered as a bridge. Caleb accepted because he finally understood that some repairs were not about wood. By spring, the first public notice about the investigation appeared. It did not name every wrong yet. It did not tell the whole story. But it confirmed that former K9 medical clearance protocols tied to a private recovery contractor were under federal review, that multiple animals had been reassessed, and that oversight procedures had been suspended pending further action. Stahl was placed under formal investigation. Harlan remained in custody while his cooperation was evaluated. Caleb read the notice once, then set it down. It should have felt like justice. It felt smaller than that, and still real. Mara called it accountability. Eliza said accountability was sometimes the only form of justice the living could actually touch. Caleb kept that sentence. The dogs still alive were being seen. The dogs already gone were being counted correctly. The men who had turned pain into paperwork were no longer fully protected by silence. It did not give Jonah back. It did not give the old Malinois his years back. It did not give Vanta the body he should have had. But it changed what happened next. And sometimes, Caleb was learning, the next thing was where God placed a person's hands when the past could no longer be carried. The final morning of Vanta's formal rehabilitation plan arrived with soft snow falling over the cabin. Not a storm, not a warning, just a quiet white drift moving between the pines. Caleb opened the back door and waited instead of stepping out first. Vanta came beside him slowly, stronger now, still not young, still not untouched, but no longer carrying pain like a secret order. His deep fawn to mahogany coat shone under the pale winter light. His black mask had a few new gray hairs near the muzzle. His tan tactical vest was gone for the walk. Today he wore only the simple working dog collar. Caleb still wore his complete green digital camouflage uniform, properly fitted and fully buttoned, plain black belt, black boots, no added gear. But something in him had changed. The uniform no longer looked like a wall. It looked like history he was learning how to carry without living inside it. They walked the short trail behind the cabin, Caleb matching Vanta's pace. No pulling, no command, no mission clock. When they reached the old shed, Vanta stopped. Caleb's breath caught. This was where the story had begun, where the dog had first stood facing town with grief trapped in his throat. For a second, Caleb feared another warning, another buried truth, another door opening beneath him. But Vanta simply turned his head and looked at him. His ears were relaxed. His eyes were calm. His body did not brace. He was not standing guard. Caleb understood before he could put words to it. The dog was not pointing toward danger anymore. He was showing Caleb that the way home was clear. Months later, the small program at Coldwater Ridge began without ceremony. No grand sign, no cameras, no speeches about heroism. Just a modest room beside the clinic where retired working dogs could be assessed carefully, where handlers could be taught what pain looked like when loyalty hit it, where records were copied twice and questions were not treated as disrespect. Eliza handled the clinical side. Tessa managed the files. Aaron helped veterans navigate local services. Dr. Greer consulted when his knees allowed and complained when they did not. Nora volunteered once a week, usually bringing coffee and pretending she had not come to see Vanta. Caleb built the ramp outside the entrance himself. On the first day, a retired handler brought in a stiff old shepherd and apologized 3 times for not noticing sooner. Caleb looked at the man, then at the dog, and said the words he had once needed someone to say to him. "You are here now. That matters." Vanta lay near the door, no longer blocking it, no longer guarding against every shadow. He watched people come and go with the steady wisdom of an animal who had carried a truth until humans were ready to receive it. Caleb stood beside him, not healed in the simple way stories like to pretend, but living, listening, staying. And when evening came, the porch light of the clinic glowed against the snow like a small lantern refusing to go out. Sometimes, a miracle does not arrive as a loud voice from the sky. Sometimes, it comes quietly through the eyes of a loyal dog, through the courage of one person who refuses to ignore the truth, and through a wounded heart that finally learns how to heal. Vanta could not speak, but he remembered. Caleb could not change the past, but he learned to listen. And in the end, maybe that is one of the ways God works in our lives. He does not always remove the pain immediately. Sometimes, He places someone beside us, a friend, a stranger, a child, or even a faithful dog, to guide us back toward the truth when we are too broken to find it alone. In everyday life, many people carry silent wounds. Some hide their pain behind strength. Some keep moving because they believe no one will understand. But this story reminds us to look closer, listen deeper, and never ignore the quiet signs of suffering around us. A small act of care, a patient heart, or one honest question can become the beginning of healing for someone else. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or share the name of a loyal dog, a brave veteran, or someone you believe deserves to be remembered. And if you want more emotional stories about Navy SEALs, K9 heroes, loyalty, sacrifice, and healing, please subscribe to Navy SEAL and K9 Stories. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your heart, and bring peace to every wounded soul watching this tonight.